Early Childhood Care and Education, or ECCE for short. My first task is to make you gag at that phrase. Why is it that we take such a wonder of human development, the exhilaration of discovery, of learning, of exploration of a child, and reduce it to 4 meaningless letters that have no soul? My second task is to blow your minds as we think about thinking future for our children in South Africa. And I'm going to be using pretty visceral terms, as you've heard, for reasons that you'll understand as I go along. But let me just start by saying that I really hope that I can assist you in moving beyond the very sterile terms that we use when we apply to childhood education, to more evocative terms that describe what really happens when a child starts to learn. The word education, in a way, for me, is dry. It knocks the stuffing out of curiosity and out of imagination. Education has come to mean an imparting of old knowledge instead of the embedding of new knowledge. And that happens through children who revel in an environment of uncertainty, in not knowing. What about care, you may say? Well, yes, care is a warmer term, but it's also a pretty distant one, isn't it? It keeps a professional distance from children. And that might be because we want to keep our emotions out of it. It may be because of our sensitivity to child abuse. But let's reclaim the instinct that is such a powerful instrument for change for children. Let's reclaim love for our children. But I get ahead of myself. Let me take a step back and start right at the beginning of early learning. Our ability to discover and to explore is embedded in our DNA. And at the time of fusion of the sperm and ovum at conception, this incredible nuclear power was released, unleashed a power that through a series of events very rapidly resulted in a wonderful human being, full of potential, provided that the basic inputs of love, food, security, and stimulation are in place. If they are, children thrive. But many children don't thrive. And we have to ask ourselves why it is that in a single species with a fairly uniform genome, there's such variability of outcome. Now, some of that outcome is that variability is wonderful, is it not? Some of us are musicians, artists. Some of us revel in science, in mathematics. But some of it is just plain unfair. Healthy, sick, rich, poor, literate, illiterate. And that variability of genetic expression, the outcome of the expression of our genes, has varied across time, across regions, across civilizations, and even within society. And so we have to ask why. Why is it that there's such variability in the human in the expression of the human genome of a single species, Homo sapiens? Now, many of you will know the book by Jared Diamond called Guns, Germs, and Steel. A famous book of his published in 1997. And in it, he tries to answer exactly this question. And he looked across civilizations, and his question was, why was it that certain civilizations survived and conquered all? And he spoke particularly of Eurasia and of North African civilizations that subjugated, displaced, and sometimes even decimated other populations. Why was it that populations further down in sub-Saharan Africa, Aboriginal Australia, Native America, New Guineans were in fact totally displaced and subjugated by civilizations in the north. And he concludes that the reason had nothing to do with their genes, but was an accident of geography and of climate. Away from the equator, people could store grains, and so nomads started to settle down and started to grow crops. And as they grew crops, they got surpluses. And as they had surpluses of food, not everybody had to be on the field every day. And so technology started to evolve because people were specializing. And then people started to trade. We're able to exchange that food across the world. And Jared Diamond argues that this is one of the reasons for the apparent superiority in terms of technology, guns, and immunity. And he explains the apparent immunological superiority of these groups as really the consequence of people coming together in highly dense environments in Europe, in Asia, on trade routes, and with an intersection between people and their own domesticated animals. And it was these factors, Jared Diamond argues, that are responsible for differentials of power, for immune status, and ultimately for health and disease across the world. Now, the subtitle of Jared Diamond's book is The Fate of Human Societies. And what he says helps to explain possibly the distribution of power, the distribution of guns and warfare and technology, and the distribution of disease. But it doesn't say anything about why it is that within societies, within the same geographical area, there is such variability. And South Africa has variability that is more in your face than most other countries. This is a picture taken at Hart Bay, maybe 45 minutes away. Look at the stark differences between rich, poor, black, white on a single screen. Now, let me put some numbers to that inequality. And here, let me say that I'm talking in probabilistic terms. What I say doesn't apply to any single individual. But in South Africa, 50%, the wealthiest 50% in South Africa owns 100% of the wealth. Half of our children are off track academically by grade 4, and they will drop out of school. That half will never get a lasting job. They will be sicker, more abusive, more violent, and die earlier than the general population. This is the reality that we have to confront in South Africa today. This is what we need to address if we are going to get on top of the challenge for our children. And so, as we think about this challenge, and the challenge of not only a single moment in time, but children who are growing up and have grown up over generations in South Africa. Generations of children who've left school, have been marginalized, have lost faith, have become fatalistic, have grown apathetic. Cultures of indifference that have been perpetuated from generation to generation. Now, the antidote to that is a sense of real and imminent possibility in life. That's how you build a culture of aspiration. Jared Diamond was talking about the fate of societies. He was looking back. But you're here today because you're thinking future, how you can create a new society. And that book needs a different title. And my title for that book is Love, Germs, and Skill: How to Create Human Societies. Now, let me take each of those ingredients and unpack it a little bit. Love. Well, what's love got to do with it? Why is it that some children thrive despite poverty? Why is it that some children are resilient, to use your own phrase, resilient in the face of such adversity? The American psychologist Anne Maston has followed children over the course of 10, 20, 30 years and surveyed sometimes longitudinal studies now of 50 years and tried to understand what is that protective factor? What is the most important protective factors? What are the other factors that enable children to thrive? And at the heart of these protective factors is love. Loving parents, loving grandparents, another loving adult in the life of a child. It's that sense of being held and loved that protects a child. And Maston calls these protective factors the ordinary magic that can change a child's life. And so we come back to the age-old question of what is love? And how can we harness the power of love to protect our children? Well, I'll give you my definition of love. Love is a primal instinct that sets us free by connecting us. When a father looks into the eyes of his baby, his whole body reacts. Hormones and neurotransmitters are released in his body, not least of these being dopamine, which gives him a sense of happiness and fulfillment and security. Now, that's amazing enough on its own, but here's the real mind blower. When the baby looks back into her dad's face, mirror neurons in her brain are stimulated, and she starts to mirror the chemistry of her father's brain, the feelings, the thoughts. In that moment, it's as if she becomes him. She becomes like him. Dopamine is released in her brain, and that stimulates learning. And as she grows up in an environment of love and of care, those neurotransmitters make her brain open, receptive to new ideas, to new language, to thoughts, and ultimately to draw pictures in her mind on her own. Love unlocks the potential of her mind. Love sets her free to think. Now, I'm sure I didn't fool any of you with that previous picture. It wasn't the picture of the brain and its connections, but it's a beautiful picture from the Hubble telescope of the antennae galaxies dancing together in timeless embrace. 4 billion years ago, the interstellar dust that fell onto this Earth contained carbon and nitrogen and sulfur and sulfur and phosphorus. And in a very short period of time, microbes started to break down that dust and form new minerals. And those minerals combined into molecules and gave rise to the complex life of plants and animals that we have today. It's minerals, these new minerals, as a result of microbes, that are in fact the very basis of human life. Now, love may just be the combination of atoms in simple chemistry, or it may be a primal force that is not explainable in human terms. But whether love is a mineral or a miracle, its origins are out of this world. The philosopher Blaise Pascal says, love has reason that reason cannot understand. We may not fully understand love, but we know that children love to learn. Blaise Pascal, let me carry on with that thought. Blaise Pascal, in his book Parcés, speaks about the simultaneous wonder and horror of teetering between the abyss of the cosmos stretching beyond all imagination and the world of smaller and smaller things. What Blaise Pascal did not realize at the time is that where he stood, right between the big and the small, between the cosmos and the biomolecule, was exactly where life formed. And original life consisted of pretty gormless and lethargic protocells. But it wasn't very long before they started to make use of energy. And it was that use of energy that allowed life forms to take off. Such was the demand for energy that some very enterprising bacteria started to specialize themselves as battery cells. And it took a very short while, maybe a billion years or so, before those battery cells realized that the real money to be made in the energy industry was through cell capture. And so those cells, those battery cells, parasitized some primordial cells and gave rise to the mitochondria that we have today. Those mitochondria are found in all eukaryote cells. So all of us sitting here, are powered by germs. But our relationship with germs does not stop there. Millions of viruses and bacteria and fungi live on and in your skin and inside your intestine. In fact, you have more microbial cells in your body than you have human cells. And you're better thought of not as single individuals, but as a superorganism of about 10,000 species. And the amazing thing is that microbiome sitting with you, makes you feel a bit small. You're just one of a million. But sitting with you now, that microbiome is transferred from parent to child. And in fact, if you look at the total genetic transfer, only about 1% of that is human, and the rest is microbial. Now, I see some of you reaching for your phones to pick up the call to your doctor for a desperate cocktail of antibiotics. Just wait. 90% of serotonin, responsible for social behavior, for mood, for sleep, for memory, for sexual desire, is produced in your gut. You still want to make that call? 50% of dopamine is produced in your gut. In fact, about 30 neurotransmitters are formed in the gut through an interaction between your human cells and your microbial cells. So, in fact, it's your microbiome that is responsible for your emotion. It modulates your personality, cognition, your immune system. These are all dimensions as a result of the incredibly close relationship between the microbiome and ourselves. Sorry, gone back. Now, global travel has pretty much eliminated regional variations in immunity. But children today face a new threat, don't they? We all do. Loss of our environment, our fear of germs, of dirt, sanitizers, antibiotics, even excessive use of cesarean section. All of that has meant that our microbiomes in our environment and in our guts are becoming less and less diverse. And that's one of the reasons for the rapid growth in immune-mediated diseases, allergies, chronic diseases, and even some cancers. This dysbiosis that I'm describing to you is in fact the result of our urbanization, the results of our exposure to chemicals and to lack of green spaces. Now, I'm not suggesting that you all go and roll in the dirt. In the gray spaces of informal settlements, gut pathogens dominate, and people there are sicker, they're more depressed, and they're more susceptible to chronic diseases. What I am calling for is for our children to learn in green spaces, in felt, on the beach, in the mountains, because that's where they live to learn and learn to thrive. But it's not only where they learn, but what they learn. If our species is to survive, we have to understand that we are no longer masters of the universe, but part of it, just a small part that has to live in harmony with every other part if we are going to survive. These are some of the key tenets that the new generation has to grow up with, understanding that they are seamlessly connected to their environment. Well, I've taken you on flights of fancy about love. Then I've plunged you into the depths of the earthlings to give you a movie premiere of Microbial Me. And now I'm going to end off pretty much where we usually start when we talk about skill, when we talk about early learning, and that is skill. Skill development, brain skill in the first few years of life sets the scaffold for the rest of your life. That skill of physical dexterity, of language, of emotion, of socialization, the ability to analyze and to plan, all of that depends on building that scaffold. It's a bit like cloud climbing. If you start from the top of a very high mountain, there's a lot more climbing inventory, and you can climb much higher. If you start very low, there's not much cloud climbing to be done. Let me rub that in a little less esoterically. Our brain during pregnancy, not ours, our mother's pregnancy, our brain is laid down, the basic structure is laid down, but it's only at the time of birth and just after birth that the neurons start to connect, that we heard about earlier. Those neurons that ultimately create synaptic connections, hundreds and thousands and millions of them, that give rise to the type of skills development that I've spoken about. And have a look here and see when the brain is most receptive to stimulation. It's early on. It's in the first couple of years of life. And when a child is in an adverse situation, when exposed to chronic stress, that child is unable to respond to that environment. When the child is in a place of nurture and love, the brain opens up, the child is able to learn and to absorb all the benefits that life has to offer us. Now, this is from South Africa 2015, and it's the findings from annual national assessments that are held testing home language and mathematics for grade 1, grade 2, 4, 6, 9, and 12. And it's split into quintile of school, income quintile of school. The poorest schools on the left, the green for each grade, the wealthiest schools on the right. And you can see here that even at the time of entering school, children in the poorest two quintiles are at a disadvantage. The deficits have already accrued by the age of 5 for home language and for mathematics. And between grade 1 and grade 4, the results continue to diverge until by grade 4, the damage is done, and then the gap continues pretty much at the same level. The result of that is a trickle of skills into the South African economy at the end of the pipeline. In South Africa, about 1 in 4 of our workers is skilled, and that percentage has not changed much over the last 20 years. And in fact, racial disparities have widened. This graph here shows that the rate of skills increase among white South Africans has been double that of black South Africans since 1994. Now, what do we do about it? Well, remember that brain-gut axis? That's the place to start. Nutrition is so crucially linked to cognitive development, to academic achievement, and ultimately to adult productivity. It really provides the physiological capital for success. And this picture here shows the height of workers during the Industrial Revolution increasing significantly in the third part of the 19th century. And that was a result of increasing food. And at that time, the result of the increasing food was increasing labor productivity, increasing income. A more contemporary study of 5 countries looking at these longitudinal studies, sometimes over 30, 40, 50 years, showed that the best predictor of adult human capital was height at 2 years of age. But in South Africa, more than a quarter of our children are stunted. And that percentage has not changed much over the last 40 years. What an opportunity to change future if we could achieve zero stunting by 2030. And there are other opportunities as well. Half of our children cannot read for meaning by the time they go to school. Only a quarter of our children participate in any sort of quality out-of-home early learning experience. I find myself caught between the horror of half of our children missing out and the wonder at the opportunity that such deficit creates. My brain-gut axis sometimes feels like it wants to explode with rage and excitement at the same time. Imagine if all of our children could be exposed to love, safety, security, food, stimulation. It would blow their minds wide open. That's the challenge of the Think Future conference that we now know is attended by 233 humans and billions of microbes. May you be enthralled and enraged over the next 2 days. And may the diversity in this room come together as one great superorganism to help change the future of our children. Thank you. You know, in modern films, there's always a little insert at the end after the credits roll to keep you glued to your seat. So this is my insert for that film, Microbiome. I told you at the beginning that at the time of fusion, at conception, when sperm and ovum come together, it unleashes a chain of events that eventually results in a wonderful human being, full of potential, provided that the basic inputs are in place. Now, your individual human, your genes, are incredibly powerful determinants of aptitude and of talent. But the amazing thing is that the factors I've been speaking about today, love, germs, green spaces, nutrition, all of those factors can actually modulate the expression of the genes. When a child experiences toxic stress, that child adapts for adversity, becomes tough, becomes a survivor at the expense of learning. When a child grows up in an environment of love, those genes are fine-tuned to thrive. And the child's mind opens and is able to absorb all that life has to offer. Now, here comes the most amazing thing. Those genetic changes that are brought about through that very fine-tuning can be transmitted from generation to at least the next generation, or even the next generation. If we can make those changes for our children, they can be sustained from generation to generation. We can start to break those intergenerational cycles of poverty and exclusion. Now that's how you create a new society. Thank you very much.
What's love got to do with it?